We're going to move into our spotlight, and I'd like to welcome to the stage Joe Chen, the chairman and CEO of Renren. Joe, come on up. And Joe is going to be interviewed here on stage by Vijay of The Economist. So I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting spotlight. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Vijay, for being here.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Great to be here with you, everyone, especially with such a distinguished veteran of the scene here. Joe, you have seen various waves of entrepreneurship here in China. Can you give us a very quick impression of what you think we're going through now? What is the period in which we're entering now, with your perspective as a seasoned, even grizzled veteran?
Well, last 2 days we just had an internal global CEO conference where we bought 30 plus CEOs and founders of companies that we invested, actually half of them actually from the United States. And my keynote speech yesterday was about history of technology revolutions and some of the lessons we learned from those, right? So my conclusion is that I think that well, there's three big technology waves in the past 2,000 years or so. The first one happened in China in the Han Dynasty about 2,000 years ago when China...
I didn't know you're that old, Joe.
I read a lot of books. and you know, when China invented the paper making, and also the percussion drill, when people use that to drill 10,000 meter wells to actually get salt. So also for that, the first gyroscope actually was invented in those days. Every one of you enjoy the benefit of that because every iPhone, Android phone has a gyroscope. So that's the first one. The second one was, of course, Industrial Revolution. And the third one was the IT revolution, which has been going on for a while, started from 1947, when the first transistor was invented. And then actually, just 23 years after that, in 1970, the beta version of the internet was invented in the US. It's called ARPANET. It was purely for defense and educational purposes, but that was the beginning of the internet age. Actually, we are well over 45 years into the internet revolution.
I'm old enough to have used it when I was at MIT. Believe it or not.
Yeah, that was called a Athena.
Yes,
Athena program. Yeah. When I was there. Yeah.
Right.
So, but I think that we are in the third stage of IT revolution, which is what I call AI revolution. That's actually a very close version of some of the thinkers in the U.S. call the singularity. The singularity is coming, it's coming because the machines are becoming so powerful, they evolve so fast, they accelerate changes, all that stuff. But the starting point was, I would argue, is probably when search became the first most profitable application of artificial intelligence. And it was the start of Google and Yahoo, Microsoft, so on, right? So we are actually 15 years into the AI age of IT, of the third phase of IT revolution. And I think just a few years ago was the invention of driverless cars by Google, and we just formally moving to the robotic age, because I think driverless cars just the robots, and it's going to be the biggest robotic wave. The first part of the robotic wave, because I think every family will need a car, and just in the future it's probably going to be driverless. So that's a robot, actually.
So you brought us to the current wave where you see us, but you started by explaining how invention, as distinct from value-creating innovation, back 2,000 years ago happened in China, right? And we're all benefiting from those things.
Yeah.
If I can turn that around and ask you, in this current revolution that you foresee, the current movement we're in now, what is the role that you see China playing in invention, and perhaps more importantly for the investors in the room and the consumers, the value creation in the marketplace?
Well, historically, any country who participate very early in any particular technology innovation, they benefit greatly, and the benefits actually last centuries or more than centuries. For example, China started this, agriculture technology revolution, and that cemented China's place for the world-leading empire until 18th century. So the benefit lasted almost 2,000 years. And only after the Europeans and embarked upon the industrial revolution, and Japan also started from the Meiji Restoration, they caught up because they participated very strongly in the industrial revolution. So China missed that one, and this is why China lost the leadership in global economy after 18th century. So now we're into the third one. And China was late for the internet part of it, the second phase, right? Because it started in the US and after that. But it's starting to catch up, right? It's starting to catch up in the later phase of the internet revolution. And China also has a thriving internet industry here. It's moving very strongly. Baidu obviously made the most money in China on AI, right? So they're the leader in search. So I think that China participated in the AI and internet revolution only a few decades after US, or a couple of decades after US, and that gap is actually narrowing. So I actually think that this is right now the best chance for China to catch up in this gigantic wave and maybe become a strong country again.
What are the prospects that we might see China leapfrog in some areas? I think most reasonable people would still agree that a lot of bleeding edge inventions are still not coming out of China first, but they might be being applied here. But some people suggest with the mobile commerce particularly, the speed at which smartphone adoption has taken off, the integration of multiple industries, that we might actually see China leading, or are already seeing China leading in some ways. Can you comment on the prospects of leapfrogging in China?
Yeah, so certain verticals of the internet business, actually China is leading, but primarily because the traditional industries that competed with those internet business models were weak, because they never had time to build out their strengths. They never had time to build out their moat. Unlike the U.S. counterparts, where for example, Macy's has been around for 150 years. Right, and Viacom or Disney has been around for close to 100 years. These businesses build a tremendous moat around their business. So it's going to take internet companies in the U.S. much more efforts to basically take down those moats. In China, it's easy because it's much easier.
Well, the absence of legacy, the incumbent's advantage, makes it easier for the newcomers.
And also access to capital. And also the extreme version of capitalism, I think, that existed in this industry in China attracted the best talents from all over the world. Some of the people like me who went to US and now attracted back to China because of these once-in-a-lifetime opportunities.
Is the enormous market, the easy money that's available, and the ability to scale what Rebecca has put as the chance to get that unicorn without even leaving China. Is it actually a double-edged sword? I mean, you know why it's attractive, but could it also be limiting companies from being world-class, from going after global scale and global quality? Is there any, because you're a perfect person to ask this because you bridge both the US and China with your investments, so I want to talk about that in a moment. But do you see any downside to that attractiveness of the China market?
There's certainly a downside of that, but I think there's also upside, which is if you have humongous local marketplace, you could build a huge business. You dominate as China first, you build a big cash flow, and you can use that cash flow to subsidize your global expansion. Right, which was the case for the Japanese electronics manufacturers back in the 70s, 80s. They compete, they have cultural competition, right? If you go to Japan, you go to these electronics supermarkets, right? I mean, the availability of products and the cultural price is just amazing, eye-opening, right? So they fought the war in Japan, and the ones that survive in Japan, Japanese local market, they take the product globally. They win the market because the local market is the testing ground for survival. I think China is the same thing. China, the internet is a cultural competitive marketplace. I sometimes tell, or today, about 50 of our global CEOs came to Beijing, and now they're leaving. And they thank me for taking them to Beijing because they got a sense of this Chinese competition. Because from our domestic companies, they get a sense that the Chinese companies are much more cultural competitive. Because if they don't survive.
The red ocean strategy lives here, doesn't it? Let's talk a little bit about.
It's not good news for the
investors necessarily.
For capital providers. That's very bad.
Tell us about what's happening at your firm. You have evolved in your strategy. I see you've diversified in a number of ways. FinTech seems to be an object of interest. You've got a number of U.S. companies in your portfolio. Have you, in effect, become an international venture capitalist at this point?
I actually care less about whatever title I get. I always get the interesting titles that people give it to me, or labels. But what I saw was a few years back was that as we fought with Tencent on the messaging and the social networking space, I realized, this is what is difficult to win because, the network effect was something that, no human can fight with, right? I mean, basically, you're traveling across a black hole, and the attraction is just so big that just suck everything in, right? That's a mechanical, physical force. It's very difficult to fight with human ingenuity and hardware. So,
if we could turn back the clock to that moment of pitched battle over WeChat, is there anything you do differently now, knowing how things turned out?
I think a lot of companies, big and small, including us, has proven it's very difficult to do so, right? I mean, even companies who's done it before WeChat did it, right? There's a media, right? There's Talkbox. There's a late, some of the latest, attempts by Alibaba and NetEase, even with incredible partnership. It's a network effect you cannot fight with. That's why Facebook had to pony up so much money buying WhatsApp, because it's something they cannot duplicate, even with their audiences. So that's why, as we continue to fight this battle and reducing our losses, we decided to look beyond China for opportunities to grow, and of course, growing, expanding operationally overseas is always very risky. And so we decided to use our investment as the leading edge for that global expansion, and work out really well because we focus on fintech, internet finance, very early on, starting about 4 years ago, even before somebody came up with the word internet finance. And because we realized that pure internet play was very difficult. I mean, basically, pure internet unicorns like WeChat, Baidu, Facebook will be increasingly hard to come back, right? They just come out at much longer intervals, and there will be probably one or two every decade, but I don't have the foresight to see that. And even I see it, we probably don't have the competitive asset to capture that, because, for example, everybody see the opportunity of mobile messaging. We saw it, as early as 4 or 5 years ago. We should have invested in WhatsApp. We talked to Snapchat very early on. They didn't want to take more money, but we were not persisting enough, I would say. If we were persisting, I'll probably get into it. But basically, the idea is that the pure internet play is very rare to come by. Why don't we just use internet as a tool to disrupt traditional industries, just like Taobao did. Taobao was a great example. Use internet, build a network, build a marketplace, and disrupt retail. And retail is so weak in China. It's dominated by mom and pop shops on small cities and the big state-owned department stores in big cities, right? It's very easy target. So in China, you have humongously huge financial sector, which is prevented by the government to to make loans beyond the defined area, right? So there's huge demand in this. So we decided to look into internet finance, and lately we're looking into transportation networks, which is also a huge industry. We don't invest beyond those two very much, so we occasionally drift outside of it. I think we have very good coverage in the U.S. on all the important sectors.
Social finance is one of yours, right?
Yes, SoFi.
SoFi. Soon to have a IPO, is that right?
I don't know. I mean, I do run a company.
Right. What's the logic of having logistics and trucking in your portfolio? How does that fit in the picture?
It's just another sector waiting to be disrupted by mobile. Because before smartphone came to life, this industry was left alone by internet industries. There was no intersection that you could think of, right? No large-scale intersections, right? But immediately after smartphone being adopted, every driver has one of these. So driver is the human productive asset. The vehicle is the physical productive asset. They're all indicated and managed by the mobile phone. That's why I have Uber. So we decided to take the idea to physical transportation, to trucking, these areas.
Are you planning to bring your portfolio is this sort of a U.S. play for you, a diversification for you as an investor, or are you actually your vision to bring value to these companies and bring them to China and serve as an advisor, which is a different way of looking at it? Are these companies that have any relevance to China, and can they make it here?
Most of them have their Chinese counterparts. Chinese counterparts who I think that it's very difficult for internet companies to expand globally, especially when they're young. So I don't advise U.S. companies to expand here too early.
So the micro multinational idea is not one that you're a big fan of?
I want to do what's right, what's sanctioned by the law of physics. Don't fight against physics. Do what's right.
And in terms of your own listing, a number of companies are thinking about leaving the U.S. Some have done so. Some are in the process. Why does it make sense for you still to be listed there?
Well, we just, I think any moves like that, I think it's, a lot of people ask us why not, right? Just like you, right? But I'm relatively slow grasping those things, and I think that
I don't believe you for a second.
Where you list doesn't change the intrinsic value of your corporation, right? I mean, what's important is really build a great business operationally and deploy your capital very smartly. And these two things has nothing to do with where you're listed.
There's been talk before you joined us on stage by previous panelists about whether valuations are too rich in China for startups. Implied is the idea that in our arena tech bubble here. What's your view of that, since you have a good visibility on both the U.S. market and here?
Back a few years ago, we do look into, deals on both sides of the ocean, and we prefer the U.S. startups, not just for the valuation. I think the valuations are comparable, but for one fact is, in U.S., basically, if one company becomes very successful and clear number one in any vertical, then investors and entrepreneurs tend to be quite hesitant to build a copycat. So that's in the U.S. But in China, any successful model, people don't hesitate at all to copy that, and even though you have a clear winner. Right. So, for example, Motif is a company we invested in the U.S. They invented this new way of sharing individual portfolios. And I heard there's 50 companies in China trying to do the same thing. In a way, the company that we invested, the Siilcon, did something very similar, but with a very interesting twist. And they were successful with that. So I think that in today's, basically, so basically with the same valuation, the same metrics, I personally slightly prefer U.S.
number one company versus the Chinese number one company, because even your number one company.
More defensible advantage, is that right?
Because the number two, number three are more hesitant to throw a lot of money at you. Unlike in China, they're going to fight to the death until the day both companies realize they have to merge. And before that, they're going to lose a lot of money. And as an investor of these companies, you don't have good sleep. So I would rather to avoid these situations.
Is this because there's too much capital sloshing around in China?
There's a lot of capital globally, not just in China. There's a lot of capital in Japan, right, which has been doing QE forever. Well, there's a lot of capital in the U.S. And China just started doing, easing, right? We're just getting started. So actually, I think that you're right. There's a lot of capital globally, also in China. Maybe China has a little more. But I think internet, if any industry is going to get any capital in China, I think internet industry probably deserve the most. Other than some probably other industries which basically take care of the basic needs of people, such as healthcare, they probably need more capital. But I think that because the internet is really not just for the internet business itself, but the people that train through this experience, they become better, more efficient business people. And when they look at business problems in other areas, in traditional industries, I think they have a natural, they have developed the ability to disrupt better. So it's a good thing for the Chinese economy.
Very good. I think we've come to the end of our time.
Yeah, that was a very long-range perspective there from history to the future. So let's give Joe and Vijay